Hyper Light Drifter is a modern, mature take on what retro Zelda would feel like today. While the core gameplay is inspired by Zelda, at least those from the NES and SNES days, Hyper Light Drifter is a highly original work, one that through the graphics, sound, and especially the music from Disaster Piece, really separate it from Zelda and also every other game on the PlayStation 4. There are some flaws that prevent it from being perfect, with steep difficulty spikes, directionless exploration, and a very minimal storytelling style, but overall, Hyper Light Drifter is a terrific experience. Hyper Light Drifter's story is not easily discernible. Cutscenes are minimal and feature abstract videos with little animation accompanied by the music. There is no dialogue, and during a playthrough, you're not even guaranteed to uncover the subtle plot elements hidden throughout the entire world. The storytelling is very abstract in how it is presented, generally. The idea is that your character is a drifter through this broken down world trying to discover a cure to his terminal illness. This drifter struggle mirrors the one fought by Hyper Light Drifter's director, Preston, who has a congenital heart disorder. Throughout the world, there are remnants of technology which the drifter can utilize for upgrades and new abilities, but what's not clear is what happened to the world and what part the drifter plays in it. The world itself, however, is beautifully designed, and it's the nuances it possesses that act as little breadcrumbs, and only that, hinting at a past world. This is actually a fine way to present the game, as the influence of the 8-bit and 16-bit eras had mostly forgettable storytelling. It's in this that Hyper Light Drifter doesn't inundate the player with needless narrative and instead leaves it up to interpretation. Little plot is better than a terrible one. It ends up being mostly inconsequential, though. The world and design are the real story here, and its exploration and unveiling is satisfying enough, even if it's only a small part of the total experience. Indie is a broad term used to describe any game not created by a major studio, but it used to be synonymous with low resolution, low polygon count, admitting that only 3D games were top quality in graphical design. While it's mostly true that many of these indies resisted that need to go full 3D, assuming what accounts to a simpler, less beautiful, or artistic technical application, it's just not the case. Hyper Light Drifter is an homage to the early eras of video games, but is spectacular in its graphical style. The pastel and primary colors make it anything but bland, and the art design of the techno-infused natural landscapes and characters are just as detailed as any AAA title you'll ever see. Hyper Light Drifter lives through its style and stands out in an age of high definition and 4K, with nothing less than the heart, soul, and mastery of technique of its creators. In addition to the graphics, Hyper Light Drifter's score is absolutely brilliant. It was created by Disaster Piece and is a haunting piece of electronica that represents the world beautifully. It's the best of 80s style synth, and it expands on retro era pastel color motif of the game. Despite the games of the 80s being incapable of such sound, it still imbues the generation. Disaster Piece's score not only fits the game well, but would be just as good at home listening on your device of choice. It's not immediately identifiable as a soundtrack like many of the orchestrated scores of so many other games or movies. It's eclectic, moody, and most of all sets the tone. It's hard to imagine Hyper Light Drifter without it. It is possible to complete Hyper Light Drifter without ever upgrading your character or learning new skills, but even with doing so, the game can be extremely difficult. Because of the mostly open exploration in Hyper Light Drifter, you will encounter areas with exponential increases in difficulty. It's not only the difficulty of the individual enemies, but it's the quantity of them all attacking you during the same encounter that tests your abilities. Fortunately, the controls are extremely tight. The main mechanics are a slashing sword, a sidearm, and the ability to dash. Dashing is the best defense, and it's a highly important means of traversal as well. It's inarguably the most important ability to master, Because physical attacks cannot be blocked, you can block projectiles if you get a certain upgrade. Dashing is to get out of the way of the trouble, means you're also initiating an attack. In this sense, it's compared to the dodging in games such as Dark Souls. Learning enemies' attack patterns, just like in Dark Souls, is very important. That's where the comparisons stop, however, with Dark Souls, as Hyperlight Drifter's combat isn't nearly as technical. Many of the bosses, it's about patience. In many instances, defeating them can be extremely difficult without some of the preferred upgrades. You could beat them without it, but many upgrades are going to help you beat them much faster. You don't have to do the one hit and run away type of strategy that sometimes works. It's only the aforementioned open world that creates these kind of unfair encounters, and this is due to lack of finding the requisite scenarios that prepare you for them, or finding enough upgrades to make the battle less difficult. Many times I found myself torn between gutting it out, just fighting the boss over and over and over until I essentially got lucky, or I'm going to have to backtrack a lot and try to improve that way to get the power-ups that you need to be able to defeat that boss a lot easier. And that's where the problem lies, is that there are very little signals in which to follow to have this gradual power-up, causing some frustration and backtracking that really no one likes. However, the gameplay is still really fun. Once you take that backtracking and you start to become familiar with the map, it'll be a little bit easier, but you still are going to run into those problems of, hey, these enemies are way too difficult without this specific power-up. Simply comparing Hyperlight Drifter to 8 and 16-bit Zelda games is a total disservice. There are similarities, yes, but Hyperlight Drifter does many things better and differently than Zelda that make it stand on its own. There are frustrations with storytelling and some difficulty with enemies, but not enough to truly dampen the excellent controls, original music by Disasterpiece, or the graphical art style that makes a modern game provoke thoughts of the 80s, yet will no doubt stand the test of time.